All right, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for being with us here on the fastest show in politics as we recover from the 2-hour tour that was Elon Musk's interview with Donald Trump, sponsored by the Trump campaign. By the way, if you were actually on X last night, you saw ads running across the spaces, wondering how this is all framed in the campaign framing here, whether that was in fact a sponsored event. It was basically a 2-hour live ad, a political ad, or was that an in-kind contribution from Elon Musk? Probably won't get the answers to those questions today, but I am curious to know about this evolution that Donald Trump might be going through with Elon Musk, and that's where we start our conversation with Nathan Dean. We have a lot to talk about with our friend from Bloomberg Intelligence, where he is senior U.S. policy analyst. Great to see you, sir. Welcome back. Before we get into what Tim Walz is up to today, it's an important part of the whole story. You were listening to this interview last night, 2 hours long, talked about EVs, among other things. Once it got started. Does Donald Trump take something away here in terms of policy? Are we going to see, we're just talking to Max about this, new incentives for EVs. Is he going to change his language when it comes to this idea, talking to UAW members, for instance?
So it's funny. This is actually one of the biggest questions we got this morning from clients is what's going to happen with the EV space. And what we're saying is, we think that the language about rolling back some of these EV tax credits, if you will dial down a little bit in terms of the campaign. Mm-hmm. But then come next year, it's certainly going to return because next year, the Trump-era tax cuts expire for individuals at the end of 2025. And Congress, whether it's a Kamala Harris-led Washington or a President Trump-led Washington, is going to have to figure out how to pay for, some of these changes. And the tax debate will create this EV calculus, if you will. Now, I think there is a serious risk that these tax credits of $7,500 are going to go away. The reason being is that, from Tesla's point of view, it's not the worst thing in the world if the tax credit goes away for other car companies like Ford and GM, who are certainly a little bit behind on the market share game. Also think of the Chinese input here. China has been talking about trying to put a lot more low-cost EV cars into the U.S. market. Yeah. And this tax credit, sort of keeps it at the wealthy level and also sort of hastens sort of the Chinese adoption, if you will. So there could be some anti-China rhetoric into this space. So certainly something to keep in mind.
He wants to kill, if Donald Trump is elected again, he wants to kill the IRA, correct? That is something that would argue potentially with some of this, right? How would you get all of this done? Would he actually be implementing new incentives?
So I think let's start with his statement of, let's just say, I want to kill the IRA. Yeah. I think he's saying that right now, and he certainly believes it. But then when you get into next year, let's look at the makeup of Congress. If he has the House and the Senate, he can use reconciliation to kill the IRA. But will he do that? Probably not. It would be more of cuts than, scalpel rather than a sledgehammer type of thing. The reason being is that there are a lot of GOP-led states right now that are getting incentives. In fact, for solar, for example, is doing a lot of plants in Georgia and Louisiana, for example. So I think you could see a lot of local politicians, and even Bloomberg News did some reporting on this a couple of days ago. Some of these local politicians may come up to Washington and say, look, it's great for you guys to say that you're going to kill the IRA on the campaign trail. Sure. But I got a company plant being built here in Georgia right now. Yeah. Don't stop me on this. And so I think it also just depends on if the Republicans win, they need to win big because I don't think they're going to be able to do it on a slow margin or smaller.
Not so easy to unwind in this climate. Donald Trump's been talking to UAW members, though, who like what they're hearing, including when it comes to EVs. He's suggesting that they've been painted into a corner by the companies they work for here, GM, Ford, and others turning away from ICE vehicles. How do you have both if you're going to be endorsed by Elon Musk, of course, non-union, and try to drive this message forward?
This is the question I think every analyst and every portfolio manager in this space is trying to figure out at the moment. And one of the comments that President Trump said is he's not against EVs, but he is okay with a small segment of the market being EVs.
Now, I think the mandates he says he doesn't like.
Correct. But, Elon Musk is also, through Tesla, has actually, lobbied for that EPA mandate, if you will. So this is where things get a little bit complex. Yeah. So let's take President Trump's statements at a high level, and then let's figure out how is he going to implement that if he becomes president. So first step is he going to nominate regulatory leadership in place that will do away with that mandate? Yeah. On the EPA side, probably he will. When it comes to the tax side, that's a legislative change. really depends on the makeup of the House. So the regulatory, essentially what you have to do is figure out, is this issue that President Trump wants to tackle a regulatory issue or a legislative issue? If it's regulatory, the odds, according to our matrix, go a little bit higher, 60, 70%. On the legislative side, think 30 to 40%.
This is turning into a fun game with Nathan Dean. Enter the new running mate on the Democratic side, Tim Walz. A lot of unknowns about this entire ticket because we haven't seen a lot of policy proposals. We don't have details. We haven't been able to pick through interviews because there haven't been any yet. No. And a lot of folks are playing the guessing game on what a Tim Walz addition might mean when it comes, for instance, to regulations based on his experience as the governor of Minnesota. Does the running mate have any impact on any of this?
Well, I think in 2024, the running mate always has an impact. But we should start with the caveat that this would only apply if Kamala Harris is president, would then defer policy to Tim Walz. But our working assumption, if you will, when it comes to Vice President Kamala Harris and obviously Governor Tim Walz, is that it's going to be progressive in certain areas, moderate in others. So if you look at their records, progressive on consumer issues, individual issues, things like reproductive rights and so forth, but then look for a little bit more moderate issues on things that the more, portfolio manager thinks of. Okay. Governor Walz put in a $1.9 billion infrastructure plan. I'm not saying that, they're going to do another infrastructure deal next year, but that's something that if you're in construction companies, you like hearing. Sure. I think also on the regulation side, just picking on Basel III Endgame, for example, this big bank capital rule, the Biden era regulators proposed it, came out to be a 19% increase in capital requirements. I would look for our Kamala Harris regulator to actually finalize it somewhere around 5 to 7% in terms. Okay. So it's the same idea, just dialed it a little bit back so that business sector is probably a little bit okay with it, and B, you're not going to run into many court issues with the Fifth Circuit and the Supreme Court, for example. So
when the phone's ringing and they're can I stick with Caterpillar and J.P. Morgan in a Kamala Harris administration, it sounds like there might be reason to. This idea that Democrats pose more of a challenge to the stock market than Republicans is being challenged right now.
Well, we obviously won't say that there's going to be a new infrastructure plan, but there will be a protection of both the IIJA, the CHIPS Act, and the IRA. Those big investments that have 5, 6, 7 year lifespans. Remember, the general contracting process, it takes about 2 years to go from the president's signature into the sector or into the companies that are actually paying, getting the benefits of this. Those protections for years 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 can go into your models. And you can have a little bit more certainty.
This is all really important considering the amount of uncertainty out there. We're going to get the big economy speech, it looks like, in Raleigh on Friday. So this will set the stage for the convention in Chicago. How far do you think Kamala Harris will go in delivering details that so many people have been asking for here?
I don't think it's going to be very heavy on the details. I think what she's going to try and do is make a connection to the American individual, because one of the things, like, let's just pick on I was at, the grocery store yesterday, price of chicken was a lot more than what I remember paying 4 years ago. So I think Kamala Harris in that speech is going to say, look, I'm going to implement an economy that will bring prices down. It could be very similar to the Biden economic theory that has been going on right now.
That's the question.
But you're just going to take the name Biden off of it.
So it's Kamalanomics, but it's kind of the same thing, because people are asking whether it's the border or the economy. You're in the building right now. What do you mean you're going to bring prices lower? I thought that's what you guys were working on already.
But, this campaign, she's done it on the quick. She's only got 3 months to essentially run. And so I think, from the campaign perspective, they really probably don't even have policies that they've vetted, worked over time and so forth. So I think they're trying to figure this out as they go. So I anticipate this speech to be a little bit high on, a little bit lower on details, if you will, more directional.
More kitchen table. It sounds like a Joe Biden speech, I have to admit. I mean, how much can they really promise next week in Chicago with specifics to get to prices? Because, by the way, Donald Trump has not issued a plan on how to lower prices other than drill, baby, drill.
Well, anytime you say specifics, my odds of finalization go
way
lower.
down. All right.
So, anytime you get into specifics, it's just, that's the point where bills go to die.
True.
So start with ideas. Start with high-level ideas. I think that's what Kamala Harris will say next week. Look, President Trump in the RNC agenda, remember, 10 years ago, these RNC agendas were hundreds of pages long.
That's right, yeah.
And now
we got 10 bullets.
10 bullets. So I think something could be similar could play out on the Democratic side as well. they didn't have the time to put together this agenda that she could sign off and say, this is mine. So I think you're going to get something like 10, 15 bullets, maybe a couple pages, and then go from there.
But she still has the risks of incumbency here, right? Or the weight of incumbency. It's not like you've been an outsider the last 3 years. You've been working with and presumably advising Joe Biden on your thoughts on how to bring prices lower. So how do you tell people with a straight face you're going to really do it now?
Well, it really depends. It's kind
totally
of
unfair question to you.
No, but it's totally ironic because, she's running as a change candidate.
Yes,
and she's
right.
the one that's in the White House.
The call's coming from inside the House.
But, I think what she'll say is that, that times have changed. A politician, as you know all too well, can spin any question that asks and say, this is how it's going to work out for me. But I think the American people, at least those that are supportive of the Democratic side, want to see Kamala Harris put a little bit more specifics behind her because right now it's a non-Biden vote that I think a lot of Democrats are looking for, and they want to change that from a non-Biden vote to a Kamala Harris vote because the the non-Biden vote doesn't get you, people aren't going to be coming out and driving in droves and so forth if they think that they're just voting for non-Biden.
Yes, correct. Well, it's interesting. We're going to be hearing about an uncommitted vote next week and some uncommitted delegates. I'll be curious to see what form that takes. In our remaining moment with our friend Nathan Dean, whose hometown is Chicago. Is the city ready for this next week?
Chicago's always ready.
Yeah?
And if you're going to Chicago, Pequod's, Lou Malnati's, pizza, good stuff. But look, the city of Chicago...
There'll be no one at Lou Malnati's next week, right?
No, but, the city of Chicago has had this before. Obviously, it was in the late 90s when they had this before. Right, but, I think the convention is going to dial... The intensity of the convention is going to be a lot much less... turmoil, if you will, now that President Biden has made this decision to step aside. There's a lot of unity in the party right now. And so there could be a lot of issues, but I think Chicago's got it.
Kingston Mines for Blues? Where do I go out at night?
I'll send you some stuff.
Okay. I want Nathan Dean's Chicago. Don't you want Nathan Dean's Chicago? Come with us. We'd have a blast. Of course, analyzing U.S. policy for Bloomberg Intelligence, our friend Nathan Dean. I'm Joe Matthew. We'll assemble the panel next on Bloomberg.